Alright, I'm getting ready to go ahead and drill my holes through my motor mount. And I wouldn't need to, but I'm going to go ahead and leave my long bit in, and I just use a box that I have laying around is what I usually use. I ought to be using a piece of wood or something. A friend of mine has a little drill press that works awful good. But what I do is I just use my long bit. And what that does, it helps me keep it partially straight because I can see the straight line better with the long bit. Now, it's pretty important to use a box that doesn't have anything in it. Because if you go through and go into your box, you might damage if you use a box sitting around that actually has something in it. So, this is an empty box, doesn't matter. Making a few holes in it won't hurt anything. And again, trying to keep my drill bit as straight as possible. Not pushing it, not trying to drill too fast. And there we go. Looks like I did a pretty fair job on keeping them straight. Let me clean up my mess. Now I'm going to go ahead and see, and of course I should have done this a minute ago to make sure, but I was pretty sure I was fine. Make sure it's the right size. Now I was saying earlier that when, I drill a hole smaller, so these will thread good, and I was kind of checking to make sure that that was right, and it does seem to be fine. But really, whenever possible, I just put a nut on the bottom. I really don't like doing it without a nut on the bottom of them. So I'm gonna had a cave in over there. A bunch of decals from some of my RC cars decided to slide off. Anyway. So I'm going to check here in a minute. I may have to find some longer bolts, and it's going to be pretty hard the way this is mounted up into the front of the airplane to get to those nuts on the bottom, but I would just really rather have that. I don't trust, and I guess I should, when they're threaded into just the nylon, it's probably fine, but I would much rather have nuts on the bottom tightened up with some Loctite on. I'd feel a lot safer. So in the end, I'll probably want to go ahead and put some longer bolts, and I'll have to find them. But for starters, I'm just going to go ahead and start my threads a little bit, so they'll thread in real nice on each hole. And then I'm going to go ahead and put I'm going to set my engine on there and try to tighten it down with my bolts, just to see what I'm dealing with as far as bolt length. And of course also making sure that I get the right, that my holes were right, which they are, but it's a way to check. So I'm just kind of test fitting it. Let me know what my bolt length is and make sure that my holes are in the right location and I don't have a problem. And make sure that my holes aren't drilled at too much of an angle, because even though I tried to keep them really straight, without a drill press they're not going to be perfectly straight, and if you get one at a real bad angle it might be a problem. Okay. Looks like the front ones are going to go through just enough to put a nut on the bottom if I don't use a flat washer, and I really don't have to use flat washers. So that means that my bolts on my back ones will have to be a little bit longer, so I'm going to have to find some longer ones. But being that I'm test fitting all this, I'm going to go ahead and put this other side one on, or the other front one, and then I'll try to find some ones that are long enough for those back ones. And you also have to be careful not to damage your exhaust port whenever you're using your Allen wrench to thread these in, because you can still damage it really easy. That aluminum is really soft and really easy to damage. For some reason that's not wanting to start. Okay, let's just push forward a little bit. Okay, I see it. Okay, I see it. Alright, I got that one started. I'm going to run it up just snug, and then I'm going to go ahead and find a couple of nuts that fit these bolts, and then I'll find two about 1/4 inch longer, and that'll allow them to go through the back, because the motor mount's a little wider as it farther it goes back. And once I get that figured out, I'll put everything in, tighten it up, check it out, and then I'll take it all back off, because this would be in the way. Yeah, I might try it, we'll see. Sometimes you can bolt this to your motor mount and then you can put your motor mount in, but usually not. Usually you have to take this back off. Okay, and there that is. Okay, that's fine. Alright. Now, let me find a little bit more hardware, a couple bolts that are a little longer. I need 4 nuts that'll fit them. And as soon as I find some stuff to work with, I'll be back. Alright, well, I found a few things that might work. Of course, I couldn't find any nuts for the ones that I had that I was going to use for these, but they needed to be longer anyway. And so I found some fine thread bolts with nuts that'll work even better because they're a little longer. It'll give me room for flat washers, which I use when I can. And then I found some other bolts that'll work, and I'm getting ready to thread them in. And of course, you always run into one standard bolt, one metric bolt, or whatever, and I just keep standard metric wrenches on hand, and it doesn't really bother me to have, well, the front ones are going to be standard and the back ones are going to be metric, and it makes no difference really. And see, I'm not going to have, well, I guess I am. That's going to be fine. And I'm trying to figure out if I'm going to be able to put all this together and then bolt it into my airplane. Which would be much easier. Well, it'll be easier on putting these nuts on the bottom is what it'd be easier on. So I'm going to try that. Let me see here. Yeah, actually I don't believe I'm going to be able to get by with that. It's just too tight in there. So what I'm going to need to do is go ahead and take all my stuff out. All my bolts out. I've got what I need. I've got what's going to work here. So I'm going to take them back out. I'm going to go ahead and bolt my motor mount in the fuselage permanently with Loctite on my bolts. Tighten it up real good. And when I'm doing that, I'll have to slide my motor back into my motor mount just to kind of get the spacing. Well, the crankcase slides between these, and if you go ahead and tighten your motor mount without sliding that back and forth in there a little bit, it'll be too tight to put your motor in when you get it tight. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and back these out. I know what works. I know what I'm going to use now. That, and I really wouldn't need this prop on there anymore, but I'm going to leave it on there. It makes it easier to handle the motor when you're trying to bolt it on, something to hold it with, and it also gives you a way to check it. And always check and recheck stuff. Even when you're trying to pay close attention, it's pretty easy to make a mistake here and there, and if you work too quickly and you don't check and recheck stuff, by the time you realize the mistake you've made, it's a lot of work to get it undone. So if you just take a little more time, and of course you can still easily make little mistakes, it's part of the deal. But if you recheck and test and recheck, you won't make very many. And in the end, it'll save you time on your build. Which is kind of funny, but taking more time on one thing will save you time on something else. And in the end, it'll take less time to build. And end up with a better build. Of course, the whole idea is not building it quickly, but building it well. Because if you slam an airplane together and don't pay attention to any of your details, and you get down to the field and go to fly it, and you've got a lot of problems. You're not going to be able to enjoy it, and it might cost you, you might damage or completely tear up your airplane. And I see that a lot, actually. Now, not with the guys that have been doing it for a long time, but with some of the guys that haven't in the past. And they'll show up with an airplane, and of course I used to do it too when I first started. Show up with an airplane and was ready to get it in the air and see what it would do, and really hadn't checked over much of anything very well, and so immediately would have all kinds of problems. Alrighty, so I'm going to go ahead and flip my fuselage back over and try to get, I'd like to have something to set this on partially. Here we go. Whenever you order something, I keep these little things that come in. I bought some LED lights, and these came in the packages. And of course they're so handy to mount batteries down on and whatever you need. They're really handy, but they're also handy to use. In this case, see, I'm going to be working on my fuselage, and I'm going to have this nose down. And I'm going to be putting some pressure on it because I'm going to be working with the motor mount and stuff. So that's perfect to lay it underneath your airplane. and give it a little bit of cushion. Alright, so now I'm going to get my bolts, which are right here. Bolt my motor mount on, and I already made sure that they didn't put too much pressure on the fuel tank, because they go right through the firewall, and if they were too long, they would technically hit the tank. So I've got some, let me see, I've got some lock washers here, some thick flat washers, and then of course I'm going to Loctite them. And I've had some people ask me, you know, if you're going to go to the trouble to Loctite them, why do you use a lock washer? And a lot of times I don't. But when I can, I do, and it's just added precaution. And see, I'm going to use them here, and then I'm not going to use them on my engine, which is odd, but I may try to find some more on my engine, but I almost need my bolt length on my engine. Anyway, I just use them when I can, whenever it's handy and I have some laying around. I use a ton of Loctite also, and really redundancy is not really going to hurt you. It's going to help you. So, if you can double do something and take a double precaution, why not? And then of course, I use this cheap thread lock I get from Harbor Freight for about $1/4 the price of a brand name, and it just seems to be just fine. Alrighty, so let me get this started. It's upside down. A lot of times it's really hard to get your hands down in these tight places, and if you'll just have a little patience and take your time, you'll get it. The main thing is the patience. You may drop the bolt a few times, and of course you're trying to get into a tight area and your hand will cramp up or whatever, but a little patience and you'll be there. Now see, this one I'm having an awful hard time getting on the spot. Be real careful not to cross thread these. Boy, you cross thread these blind nuts and you'll really regret it, because then you'll have to knock one off out and you'll have to put a new one in and to do it right. Anyway, just going to get them started. Start off with. I'm going to have to shed my coat here in a minute. My shop's starting to warm up. It was really cold in here a minute ago, and now it's with my propane heaters going. I use these little Mr. Heater Buddy heaters, and they really warm it up pretty fast. Of course, I've insulated my shop pretty well, which helps. Alright, so there's one started. Get another one started here. Of course, I already put a generous amount of Loctite on these, and slid my washers and stuff up. Already dropped them. Here we go. Something that's magnetized handy really helps when you're dropping stuff in the fuselage as you're trying to put it together. Golly. Trying to squeeze my hand into that little spot to get this one started. is not working very well for me, but I'll get it done. Sometimes you can position it on your wrench and you can guide it in there if you're real careful. And sometimes you can't. So let me go ahead and get let me get a top one here started. It'll help hold everything in place. A lot easier to get to. Started a few threads. Make sure I don't wipe my Loctite off with my hands. Okay, fish my hardware back out of my fuselage with my magnet. Try this again. Oh, there, it went much better. And of course, I'm using a ball-in Allen, which will give you a way of angling them and so on. And that's why I was able to aim this at where it needed to go so easily. Now I'm going to try to get these, and they give a line on the fuselage right on the firewall to line up your motor mount. But since I had to slide my motor mount apart, I had to put marks on it. So what I've done is I slide my marks that I made for my distance that those two pieces need to stand apart. And then I still need to center my motor mount with their marks. And since the marks that they made on the motor mount are slid past each other, I put the mark on the firewall in between those two marks, and it should be right. And then I'm going to go ahead and try to tighten one just a little bit. Okay. Looks like I need to go over just a hair. Okay. It looks pretty good. Now I've tightened one side a very small amount, and the reason I did that is because I'm going to take my motor, I'm going to stick it between these rails, and I'm going to slide it down in there and let it sit in there between the two rails, and I'm going to tighten the two top cap screws. Of course, I'm not cinching them down super yet, but I'm just getting them tight enough to hold itself in place. And of course, the reason I did that is because I wanted these to position themselves the right distance apart for the crankcase to go down in between them. If you don't do that, a lot of times it'll be really tight. You get in there. Now I'm going to go ahead and tighten my bottom ones, and then I'll go ahead and cinch it down. The secret to getting into these good is a really good quality ball-in Allen wrench. Or you could use a very long Allen wrench and you could go all the way here to the front. That would work also. And it's going to be a little tricky putting the nuts on the bottom of my motor mount bolts up in here, but I'm just going to have to deal with it because it would be awfully hard to get around your motor and tighten these up. So I believe this is the best way. Now I'm going to go ahead and cinch them up. I'm not going to overdo it, but I do want them tight. So I'm going to pay attention to when it collapses that lock washer. The lock washer has a little spring end, and when it collapses it and holds it flat, you've got a fair amount of pressure on it. If you over tighten these, it'll just kind of push out the nylon, and it's more than likely losing strength. So be careful not to over tighten them. Now on these that I have to get to with the ball end, to get them tight with this small end's awful hard to get enough pressure on it. So this usually works. I just clip on a little pair of vice grips onto my Allen wrench. And that usually gives me enough hold to go ahead and tighten those nice. Not over tightening them, but tighten them good. Alrighty. One more. Okay, and then after I get them all tight, redundancy. I check them again. I don't know why, but I do. You see, I was able to give those just a little bit more. Not over tighten them, but I do want them tight. And there we go. There's those. Now I'm going to go ahead and try to install my engine, and I'm going to have to put the nuts on the bottom of them, and it's going to be pretty hard. I believe I'm going to go ahead and try to find some more lock washers. Yeah, it looks like I've got some here. So I can use lock washers and flat washers. Okay. Okay, now I'm actually going to probably do the back ones first on the motor, and the reason I'm going to do that, it doesn't really matter. The only thing it would matter for is, and I'm going to lay my peel lines here to the side. The only thing it really will matter for is it might make it easier for me to reach the nut on the bottom of the back bolts. So, we'll see. Now I'm not using lock washers on these. I'm only using flat washers, and the reason for that is I kind of need that length to have plenty of thread sticking through to put my nut on the back side of them. Okay. Now these bolts, being a metric bolt, are just a little smaller, so they're going to just go right through the holes that I drilled, which is fine because I'm putting nuts on the bottom. Okay, so I need to put a lot of Loctite in these. I really need to wet these down. Okay, and then I'm going to hold them up in there with a pair of hemostats, and I'm going to start with my small pair because I believe they'll just be easier to get up in there. And then when I'm ready to cinch them down, I'll go to a larger pair. And let's see if I can see up in there to set them where I need to set them. Yeah, maybe. Get in a position where I can see everything I need to see. Being awful careful not to damage the tail. Alrighty. Of course, you've got to get the... I'm trying to hold that nut right where it needs to go, and you've got to get the angle of it perfect. Otherwise, you won't be able to hold it where it needs to go. Alrighty. Now again, I need to get it in position where I can see what I need to see to hold that nut up into place. Okay, and right there is where it goes. Some of this stuff can seem really hard and really complicated and take a fair amount of time to get accomplished. But if it was easy, everybody'd be doing it. I've heard that before. So, okay, why am I really need a longer pair of hemostats. This little pair is usually easier to handle, but I'm going to have to find one of my larger pairs here. Here we go. Here's the ones I need. They're just a little longer, a little bigger. Should be a little easier to hold my nut in the right position. Make sure it's set at an angle that will set up in there. And of course the problem I'm having is when I raise all this up, my motor is actually tipping up in there and pulling my bolt loose a little bit. Just hard to hold everything and see up in there where I need to see. I'm getting there. And really, when I get it close enough, I should be able to do it without even looking, because I should be able to set it right on there. And I believe I got it started. Yes, I did. Alright. Now, I usually don't go ahead and cinch everything down, but I'm going to try on this one. Okay. And it didn't hold it well enough to cinch it down. I'll have to go ahead and... I'll have to use a little something else in there. I may have to use a little wrench or something. Alright, let me try to do the other side here. Let's see here, what have I got? Need to make sure that I haven't mixed things up. Okay. I believe that's right. Okay, I actually picked up one of the nuts from my other bolts, and they seem to be the exact same thread, so it's not a problem, but I'm going to use the one that came off of this particular bolt. Lots of Loctite. Put it into my hemostats at an angle. Now I should be able to, now that I kind of know what I'm doing on this, get my right angle and get it where it needs to go. It's always simpler the second time you do it. And I've already got that one going. And I'm going to try to cinch it up. And again, my hemo slipped off. I'll have to use something that will hold it a little better to do that when I'm ready to go ahead and tighten them completely. Now I'm ready for my front ones. They are a Phillips head. And again, just a tiny bit smaller size than my holes I drilled, but which is not really going to matter because I'm putting nuts on the bottom of them. If I wasn't putting nuts on the bottom, I couldn't use them. Alright, now Loctite, I'm going to use the same procedure as I did on the back ones. Put a bunch of Loctite in those. You can do a lot better job when you're putting the Loctite on the threads of the bolt instead of the nut. But when you're getting ready to push the nut or the bolt through a nylon piece, it kind of squeegees off the Loctite. So when you do it that way, you just need to put it inside the nut, and when you do it that way you have to put, I think you use quite a bit more to get a good amount on it. Now here in a minute I'll probably use needle nose or something to hold all these really well, to really cinch them down. Let me see here. Because see, that just got close to tight and then it pops out of the hemostats because they just can't hold it good enough. And you could use a little wrench or anything that you can reach up in there and hold it really good to cinch them down. And it's real important that you cinch the motor mount bolts down. They really need to be tightened up. Even though they've got Loctite and everything on them, they will still need to be cinched down really well. There's just a lot of vibration there. Okay, now I need to get something to hold the back side of them. I've got them all run up on there a little ways. Let me try to find a good pair of needle nose. A good pair of needle nose, I should be able to get enough pressure on the back of them to go ahead and cinch them up. In other words, hold that back side well enough to keep it from spinning. We'll see. That's actually not going to work for the back ones. It might work for the front ones though. I just can't get at the angle to get the back ones. But it's going to work on the front ones. Okay, I got one front one cinched down really well. Get on this other one. You can look for the lock washer on these to flatten down really good. Okay, I got that one cinched down. Now I'm going to have to find a little different tool on these back ones. And I don't know exactly what I'm going to use. Let me see here. I'm going to try a more sturdy pair of hemostats. It might lock on there a little harder and hold on to those. Yeah, I believe that's going to work. It's kind of hard to get in just the right spot, but it's holding them pretty well. You can get different sizes and stuff of these hemostats, usually in the fishing aisle, like at Walmart or something. And of course, they're selling them to take your hooks out of your fish mouth when you're fishing stuff. So whenever I'm somewhere, I usually go into the fishing aisle and see what they have and stuff like this, and end up with several different pairs of these laying around. Even though it looks like the same tool as another one will do it a little differently. And see, I just tried to get a hold of these and tighten these with two other sets of hemostats, and they weren't able to hold hard enough to tighten these, but yet this other set, this other set's exactly where I got it. This set's a brand new set, one of the new sets I've got out of the fishing aisle at Walmart. So there we go, there's those tight. Now, I'm going to go ahead and recheck everything, and if it's off, I'll have to make some adjustments, but make sure my drop zone here is right. Make sure I'm laying all the way against the firewall, and I need to be at 6 1/8. And I am. I'm actually at 6 1/16. May I say that? That one comes out 6 1/8. This one looks a little closer. Yeah, that one looks like 6 1/16. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the back plate. Let me set this up a little bit where I can get to it. I'm going to set the back plate for the spinner up here, and I'll really be able to tell. And if I actually have it a little too close, which I may have, boy, barely. I could probably use something and space it out of here, right at that thrust washer. But I'm going to take my spinner and I'm going to set it up there and see how close it fits. Now if it actually hits, you really got a problem. If it actually hits, I'm going to have to make some adjustment. And it doesn't. It fits perfectly. It really does, but I'm actually almost a 1/16 closer to this front edge than they wanted you to be. So it's really not going to hurt anything. It still misses everything. Nothing's going to touch. It's not a problem. But I ended up being everything pulled in about a 1/16. And it probably just because I, cinched up my motor mount much tighter this time, and it pulled everything up back toward the firewall. But looks like I'm going to get by with it, no problem. So let's flip it back over and see what we got. And I'm not sure. I'm going to change angles several times today to try to get a good angle on everything as I go. So let me see here. I'm going to go ahead and move the camera again. Just trying to keep a real good angle to see everything. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move the camera and try to get a little better spot for it again. And I'll be right back.